Welcome to Metapod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of Metapod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, back as your host of Metapod, and I have an honor to have a very, very good guest with me today, Steve Snedegar. He's going to be talking about things near and dear to our heart, remembering that we're all faced with those common three challenges: forever labor shortage, digital transformation, digitization of work. And in fact, we just have to do more with less and get things done. And Steve's going to help us zero in on is your manufacturing operation really prepared for the big challenges coming up with the new economy? And we're talking a lot about, onshoring and tariffs and some of these other things as well, and help learn how to navigate those economic uncertainties that are coming going forward. But before we jump into that, Steve, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, hi, my name is Steve Snedegar. I'm a business consultant. I've been helping companies get healthy for just over 30 years. And I focused in manufacturing, industrials mostly, but manufacturing, service, distribution, all the above. And what you just said is couldn't be any more relevant to what's going on in the economy right now. So this is definitely a topic that I'm looking forward to discussing with you.
Yeah, that's cool. I've known Steve for a number of years now, and when thinking about somebody that's needed for a really tough, gnarly problem, maybe it's private equity owned and driven. They've got some really serious challenges, turnaround situations. Steve's kind of one of the people I think of right away when we're looking for that kind of talent. He's actually one of the members of our Meta Expert Network that we put to work with customers who got to solve those difficult and gnarly problems. So Steve's a great representative of our community of talent. So with that, let's kind of get into a diagnostic. Steve, I know you've given some thought to, generically, what are three key areas as we get into the, 2025 and beyond, three key areas organizations, manufacturers in particular in North America should really look at and diagnose, kind of offer up a diagnostic to help the uninitiated who may not be familiar with some of these terms ask the right kinds of questions. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and you think of what the economy is doing right now, there's threats of more tariffs, even though we've seen them before, but more tariffs, more onshoring, deportations, putting pressure on labor. When I think of a healthy operation that's able to take advantage of those conditions versus being on the other end of that, you're damaged, you're harmed. Hopefully it doesn't put you out of business if you're not ready for it, but certainly if you're ready, you can ride the wind and take advantage and actually come out ahead of your competitors that aren't thinking about it. So I think about it in three areas. What happens with the onshoring? So your demand is going to go up. What happens when your cost bases go up? And what happens when the labor starts to disappear? There's a shortage, which could be because your labor is leaving, or it could be because you're just out of your demand. So I think about those three things, those three areas. Really, if you dig down, into each of them with onshoring, if you don't know what your capacity is, you don't have a lifeline for automation, and you're not doing anything with Lean or Six Sigma, I would say you're probably looking at being in some kind of trouble as these economic things, these developments unfold. So with capacity, I would say a couple of questions you want to ask yourself. Do you know what your open capacity is? If it's under 80 or under 20, you're probably in trouble. What is your OEE? Your operational effectiveness, your availability, your performance, your quality of your operation, and then what's your manpower productivity? So if you don't really know those three numbers and you don't have I would say a daily check-in on them with your capacity, you're probably going to end up in trouble. The second part of that is automation, and everybody knows what happened in 2020. If you weren't thinking about automation then, I think if you were in any kind of operating or manufacturing business and you weren't busy like to your capacity, the problem was probably you. So knowing, what percent of your plant is automated. If it's zero, you need to get something going immediately. Have you looked at your options, your pricing, your lead time, and have some kind of a thought? And then the last piece of that is the Lean and Six Sigma. I think if you're watching this call, you probably already have at least some level of experience with that. But do you have a visual factory or using visual boards, Gemba walks, stand-ups? And does the team have the capacity to do things like 5S exercises, Kaizens, just getting a pull system in place, SMED and those other types of Lean and Six Sigma tools? So that's the first piece of it, Ron, is just getting ready for onshoring. Does that?
Yeah, and I want to ask a question about the onboarding because I'm a guest on other people's podcasts and shows as well, and a lot of topics come up around this onshoring. And you've been through it a cycle or two. What are the typical costs that you need to recognize? You know, if you're going to onshore, that sounds great, but what are the kinds of costs and headaches people run into when they do that?
Yeah, I think the first one is that the demand starts to come at you, and you feel great because you're winning new work, and everybody twists their arm and pats themselves on the back. Your sales team feels like they're killing it, but they're really not. It's just your demand is growing. To me, not being able to handle that, it's going to go somewhere, right? That new demand is going to go somewhere. So big companies that were offshoring now start to pull it back a little bit, right? And they're going to dual source or tri-source. If you don't have fast open capacity, the ability to provide fast open capacity, they're going to find it somewhere else. So that when everything settles and the dust settles, your chances of winning that work at that point in time are gone. They've already made their call. So fast, ability to scale, and using those three tools that I just mentioned are kind of my go-tos.
Yeah, so you think about the cost of onshoring, right? So you might be paying more for labor. You should be paying less for logistics if you're onshoring it versus bringing it from, China, for example. You would hope that you'd have some economies of scale that you can, you're doing more of the same physical footprint. Now, it's where Lean Six Sigma comes into play. One of the things I'm curious about, what would be some hidden costs, surprises that companies, when they're doing onshoring, what are some hidden things that might pop up and bite them that they didn't anticipate?
Well, there's a couple dynamics going on here. If you're the operating company and you're going to be taking on more work, let's just say you're in manufacturing and you use a lot of steel. As you go to grow, if you're not ready for that, you don't have adequate working capital. And that was probably not, I'm glad you asked that question. That was not part of what I was going to bring up, but it's a very important one. When you're shrinking, you're actually generating cash because your cash cycle is behind the sale that's now shrinking. It's the inverse of that when you're growing, and it sucks up a lot of cash, Ron. So that's one of those costs. I don't know if it's not a P&L cost, it's a balance sheet impact. If you don't have access to capital when you go to grow, you're going to be crimped, and that would be the long pole in the tent, as they say.
Yeah, so you could be getting nailed with some pretty usurious interest rates if you don't have a great financial position, or even have to leverage your receivables, right, to try to get in front of the growth curve with respect to investing in the materials, to say nothing of buying the equipment or moving the equipment back, and or perhaps even adding on to your physical footprint to be able to do all that. Okay, so thanks. I just occurred to me that I wanted to probe that a little bit more deeply. So really, take a look at the onshoring opportunity, but then the impact of that goes well beyond just the we're going to produce
That's right.
product here now. Well, there's lots of things you got to think through there.
Yeah, and in this short amount of time on this podcast, we certainly can't hit them all. I think there's a couple of highlights. That I guess the second major one would be the labor shortages that come along with the possibility of all these mass deportations, which, as we all know, in manufacturing, it's one, I call it a single fluid labor pool. Labor comes out and it doesn't just reemerge. You don't just go, I'll go hire some more people. I mean, you're talking about potentially millions of people coming out of the workforce with deportations, and that could be extremely problematic. Add on top of that the demand is rising. Now you've got it coming from both ends. So if you don't have the ability to recruit, train, and retain, those are the three legs of that stool. And I can get into the diagnostics, to let the listeners kind of assess themselves if they think they need help. But that is the kiss of death when growth happens, if you just don't have the people. And if you didn't have the automation in place, now this is even worse.
Right, because the automation should offset needing to hire as many people.
Yeah, automation, they don't need breaks. They don't complain. They don't ask for raises every year or more than that. And they generally don't make very mistakes. So, but in getting ready for that, but I think a lot of companies that I work with will just say, I'll just go out and I'll recruit. I'll hire a recruiter, which sounds great, and I think you should do that. But that's not going to get you because everybody's doing that, and those recruiters are working for everyone. And unless you're going to pay super premiums, which I would suggest you're not, or be the squeakiest wheel and you get their attention, you're competing with everybody else that recruiter is working with. They have other clients other than you. So I always recommend whenever I see somebody that's getting ready to grow. I worked with a company a few years ago, and they took their staff from 100 people to 300 people in the course of a year. That was a lot. That's a lot of welders and machinists and fabricators and assembly line people. And one of the things we were able to do was we put an internal recruiting function. We still used outside recruiters. We created an internal recruiting function, tracked everything. We actually used an HRI system to track it. But you got to figure you're going to bring people in. You got to have a system to bring them in, but you also have to have a system to make them who you want them to be inside, and not just think you're going to go grab the skill level that you need, because it's not going to be there, especially if it's high skill. Everybody's going to go after them. The wages are going to inflate, but you have to be able to go after the ones you want, but also be okay going after the ones that aren't quite there, and having an internal training function, whether it's where it's a formal training or a partnership that you have with some college or trade school. You got to be able to train them up. You can't go from, I would say, somebody working in a fast food counter to to an apprentice, into a machinist, in the course of a couple of months. But you can take somebody that's been in manufacturing in other jobs. Maybe they've been in supply chain. Maybe they've just been working around the factory. They came out of trade school. They're good with their hands. You can put them to work, but you have to have something to train them. Then the last piece of that is you have to be able to keep them, because everybody's coming at them. And if you can't find them, train them, keep them engaged, that whole piece falls apart fast.
Yeah, turnover is going to eat you alive in that case. If you're not quote unquote being an employer of choice or to retain people, that's going to be a real challenge. And one of the things you said there, I think is pretty important that I want to make sure I'm clear about is being able to train people and make them effective quickly. You go from 100, that story, 100 people to 300 in a year's time. That's crazy, crazy rapid growth. So
Yeah.
did you have success, really helping the organization gauge for how do we develop a development program so that we can take people, as you said, relatively unskilled, but get them to some point where they can drive value and do something meaningful in the organization, and basically look at a phased approach, right? I bring them in, and after the first 3 days, they're able to do these three things, right? And then if they succeed, they gravitate to the next three things. Then if they succeed, they continue to gravitate. So it's like this growth path. So you don't have to wait months for somebody to become effective, begin to add value. So you can put those new entry people on the very menial things like stocking or maybe cleaning things or preparing things for assembly and things like that. They're relatively low skill, but then very quickly allow them to move up. So you're continuously priming the pump with more newer people. And as the newer people are learning and basically prove they can stay, right? They're coming to work on time. They aren't doing anything dangerous, right? They're not behaving in a bad manner, and then we can invest in them. Did you do that kind of, is that what you would suggest?
Yes, and I would say that if you're one of those operators where you just think, I'll have them shadow somebody and I'll teach them that way, that works when things are slow. That's not going to fly when you're trying to move fast, because new people do one of three things in operations, in any kind of operation, whether it's manufacturing or service or just assembly work. They generally are going to be they're going to make more mistakes. They're not going to be as efficient. Number two, they're going to make bad parts, or they're going to do things that can cause you, I call them turnbacks or escapes, right? It gets to the customer, part of your PPM, your failure rate. And last thing, and this is the scariest part, they get hurt. I was working with this client that had 3 years no lost time in a fabrication plant, and they went to double their staff, and within 6 to 8 months, they just kept having injury after injury. And one of them was at OSHA, a huge one. A guy broke his leg. The bone just came straight out of it just because, he was not paying attention. He was new. Your management team has to manage differently. You have to train differently. And for your point, you have to have a checklist so that they're progressively going through certain tangible things, mental and physical tangible things that you can check off. And I also advise that when you do that and you put that together, you work with the person so they understand it, and you put compensation with it. So the faster that they are able to complete and mark these things off, the faster they get to the target comp that you were talking to them in negotiation when you hired them. That to me is the way to win there. And just, and you may have heard the watch one, do one, teach one that they talk about in surgeons with surgeons. It works in manufacturing. It works in operations as well. The people that are already doing the job, their training reinforces their ability to do their job even better. You make them more efficient.
Okay, cool. So what's that in the third area? I think you want to get into what the cost basis, inflation, and pricing, and
Yeah.
what are we digging for there?
Yep. So, I'll just throw this out here. If you're, and I hope I don't hurt anybody's feelings here, but if you're one of those people that your estimating process is you grab a sheet of paper and you just put some math on it and you say, well, labor costs this, the material costs that, and it feels like my shop rate should be, I hear that word shop rate. When people say that, I cringe a little bit because there's a lot more to it than that. So if you're estimating using those traditional methods, you're not using some kind of a tool that has the ability to bring in costing, like from an ERP system. Even if you don't have an ERP, if you don't have the ability to know where your costs are, by the time we get into this cycle, your costs are going to start moving north. They're going to, right? Suppliers are going to know they're busy. Everybody starts to raise prices when they get busy. Right? If you're private equity owned, you're going to be expected to do the same thing, right? Your sponsors are going to go, when are you going to raise prices? Everybody's busy. Everybody knows how that works. But the ability to keep track of your cost basis, your labor, your material, and then as you get less efficient because you have new people and you're busier, that does happen. You'd think we're busier, we'll get more efficient. If you had all the same people that you had before, that would be true. If you're incrementally busier, but if you're exponentially busier, your efficiencies are going to go down. They'll eventually come back up, but your cost basis, you have to reflect that in there. So if you don't, you basically could have this, what I call profitless prosperity. You win all this work, you feel great, and then you go back and you look at your P&L, you're like, oh, why did that happen? And you won't see it generally for many months. So that's the first piece of it. And then as far as adjusting your prices, I've worked with clients that haven't adjusted their prices in years because they say, if I raise the price, they're gonna shop me out. That may be true, but if you're a solid operator and you're doing a great job, you need to have something every year that you're doing some kind of a market check. And I like to recommend, going in at same time every year with different customers, and don't do it all in January 1st. Build your customers throughout the course of the year. Do it a little bit every quarter so that you can flatline your P&L. You don't have this big jump, and then you have the big compare to go up against. But put that in, make it so your contracts, all of your contracts have some kind of language in it where if you get, you saw what steel did a couple of years ago, right? 21, steel prices just went straight up the roof, and then they came back down. But if you didn't have the ability to capture that and pass that through, you could end up eating all of that for some period of time that would just erode all of your margin.
Certainly, I've heard those horror stories over the years. That's for sure. Heck of a challenge. So, as an organization, you need to be assessing, do we have the data and the information to allow us to make good decisions? Are we using sophisticated estimating methods so that we really understand what the true cost base is going to be and be able to factor in where we're going to get impacted, rising labor costs, right? And then rising material costs, and we've got the mechanism in place to protect the organization. If we don't, that's going to have to be one of the go-dos from an advice perspective. So maybe we pivot to that now. I mean, let's just assume that, organizations have looked at these three different areas and determined, yes, in fact, we have some gaps. There's some opportunity there. We should be concerned about fixing it. Give us some sage advice here. How do you go fix those issues?
Yeah, I would say first, with respect to your capacity, immediately jump in and start, even if you don't have a visual factory, get your KPIs, make them visual as much as you can. It's your escapes for quality, it's your on-time delivery, it's your OEE, it's your productivity, your efficiency metrics, and measure them every day. And have a stand-up. Make your team look at those numbers every single day so that they understand them. You can take that to a whole other level. You can get that down to the cell or the workstation, which I highly recommend. But baby steps first, I would recommend. That's the first thing out of the bat is know what your true capacity is by measuring all of those things. Again, we're just talking about fixing for the onshoring thing. So it's capacity, it's automation. If you don't have a plan to get automated, even if you don't have the budget for it right now, have a plan. Create a budget. You don't have to spend it, but you should have a plan and do it quickly. And then last, the Lean and Six Sigma. If you have that on your team, that's great. There's tons of books. I was going to point behind me. I just moved my office. Used to have, if you recall that, used to have a big book bookshelf behind me with all these books.
Right.
I've read every lean book you can imagine, but I would say right away, get an expert, hire someone that knows how to do that, and start that journey. It's just like the automation. Start the journey now, or if you're already on the journey, put some fuel on it, make it go faster. That's the first thing is, fixing your capacity. I don't know if you want to add anything there on just from that piece of it is, yep. So what discovery happens, all that happens. Next thing is this labor piece, and I strongly recommend, even if you're not feeling the pain of it yet, it's only a matter of time. If you don't start it now, by the time you do feel it, it'll be too late, and everybody's going to be going around you. I would say set up an apprenticeship program, go work with your local trade schools and other schools, high schools, start them young and get them indoctrinated. Have tours, bring the kids, the students from these trade schools and the high schools, bring them to your operation, show it off, be proud of it, and get people interested in being part of you, right? You want to sell it, but then create this apprenticeship program that you have steps. It's going to take from the time you think about it to the time you get it in place, you're probably talking a month to 2 just to get the program rolled out right. So start that journey now before the things start to happen in the economy. Do it now. Also, create, even if it's an admin that works in your business somewhere. I was able to start this one program. We went from having no recruiters, using 2 outside recruiters, to having 8 internal recruiters. And a formal program to train them. We had to train the trainer for recruiters. I recruited a recruiter who worked for a big recruiting firm, came in, we set it up, and then we started hiring more recruiters. But I would say start with, at minimum, even if you don't have the budget to bring somebody in from the outside, start at minimum with one of your administrative people and teach them how to look at resumes, give them an interview guide, teach them how to screen people, let them practice, and get the program started. Put a tracking mechanism in place. You could use Excel or an HRIS system. They all have those modules. But if anyone that's listening is worried about the budget and money, and maybe they haven't started getting busy yet, you don't have to spend any money to get it started. Somebody can get an Excel sheet created. I can help. I've helped dozens of people with that. And you start small and you go from there. And then retention. This is probably the lowest cost thing you can do. Just be a great place to work. Look at if your turnover rates are high, which they can be in operations, whether you're in, true manufacturing, like we've been focusing on here, but you could be in distribution, you could be just doing in assembly. If your turnover is more than about 8 to 9%, it's going to get worse. It's absolutely going to get worse. Be a great place to work, hold roundtables, hold town halls, walk around and talk to people. Get your managers to just own those relationships and talk to people. And there's a whole bunch of techniques that we teach. We teach operators how to do that. There's a bunch of what I'll call them, they're tricks is all they are. It's like having a t-shirt cannon and walking around like that, or having a bingo board. There's 100 of those things. So, that recruiting, training, retention, if you don't have your hands around that, you're going to really struggle.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask about is you advocate for, and if you had success with, I'll call it public-private partnerships or economic development organizations, and your community colleges. You mentioned high schools. If you had success where you could farm that, in other words, there is money available to fund training. There's money available to develop skills, and I'll call it disadvantaged youth. Like inner city youth, for example. There's pretty cool stuff going on out there. That's something you can't just turn on with the snap of a switch. Those are longer term plays, because it may take years for these children to actually make their way out of grade school, if you will, into the workforce. And if you haven't planted those seeds and begin moving them along, that's going to be a real problem. So have you had success with that approach?
Yes, it depends on the state. Every state has something. Some states are really easy to work with. Some states are a nightmare to work with. But I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great point. And you do have to start early because depending on what you're going after, and some states have different levers you can pull. Some are after actually targeting helping people restart their lives, right? There's a different bucket of money for that than there is just for training and development. A lot of states have pretty easy money to go after training and development if you're hiring. And I've even seen some states want to contractually agree with you. They'll give you a certain amount of money if you hire X number of people in Y amount of time horizon. And I have seen those monies not just get used for training, but to actually build training rooms, like sophisticated. You got screens, you've got monitors, you've got AV stuff. Even I was able to secure, it was a machine shop. They were able to they were able to buy a bunch of stations that had different software on there to teach people how to read prints, how to program, CNC machines, and the state paid for all of that. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ron.
Yeah. So if you haven't done it yet, the advice is you better be networking with, local economic development authorities, maybe your local chamber of commerce, maybe there's a business association, maybe there's a business group. I'll call it, what do you call it? The name's escaping me now, but where
Yeah,
business people
generally
come.
economic. Yeah, yep.
Yeah,
Generally economic development of the state. Yep.
exactly. And that's, you can't wait. So if you're thinking that you were going to need to onshore or reshore, start moving our manufacturing back stateside, well, okay. So yeah, you got to have space, you have to have equipment, but if you don't have people ready to go, it's all a big waste. And that takes a little bit of ramp up time, particularly if you want to be able to take advantage of funding and minimize the cost side of it. So, yeah, so that was good. Thank you.
Yeah, and then the last piece, just about the costs. There's a couple of things I'll recommend that if you're a listener and this is resonating with you whatsoever, create an estimating tool. If you have an ERP, most ERPs have it in there. Learn how to use it. Teach people. If you have it, I strongly encourage that you teach your people how to use it properly, because I've seen all kinds of things where guys are monkeying with. In order to get to a number, they monkey with the cost basis to get to the number.
Mm.
Then you don't know what your real margin is, and you won't until your P&L tells you. Versus get your cost basis right, make sure that's in check, make sure all your input costs are accurate, because they move around in the background to your average wage changes when you add it. Like, for instance, as you're getting busier, you're adding overtime before you add people. Now your average wage, some ERPs have a little checkbox. You can put the overtime in there and it'll go grab it if you're using timekeeping. But some don't. If you're not using that timekeeping from that ERP and your OT percentage goes up, now your cost basis just went up and you're not capturing it. So capture the cost basis, get it right, and then apply the margins you want and know where they are. For the wage inflation, this is something that's I just beat my head on the wall. I've had some clients just say, well, what do you pay your people? What's the wage rate here in the market? And they go, I think it's, well, are you using a benchmarking tool? There's a bunch of them on the market. They generally have a subscription, but you need to use that. And then when you go to interview people and you hire people, you ask where they are, and together those create 2 points of contact, so to speak. Know the wages of the people that are on the market that you want to go get before you have to go to market. If you don't do that and you go to market, your first few interviews that you like and you go to extend an offer, you're going to get declined. You're probably going to miss the mark. I've seen it. I have never seen anybody that's overpaying, put it that way. If you haven't had to do a lot of hiring, you're probably underpaying the market because you haven't adjusted it. So you need to be prepared to make an adjustment that's going to have to probably go across multiple tiers of people. And I strongly recommend that if you have any kind of skilled manufacturing labor, put them into tiers so that you don't have to go to the market. You don't go to the market and some guy wants $30 an hour, and then you come back to your shop and the next nearest guy is at 24 or 25, and you don't have tiers for skill levels. Have tiers, define what the skill levels are, make it tangible that it's an on-off, it's binary. So they have to either take a test or you have to answer a couple of questions to get to that next tier. Then it goes up. So then you can go to the market and you want to get that $30 or $32 an hour guy. Well, you've got a tier for that already. And the people that are in your shop are already making that wage. So now you're not going to have a small mutiny on your hands when you bring in a high-skilled person off the street and says, he's new, how did he get this wage? Well, it's because of his skill set. And then the last thing I would say is tie your performance reviews, not necessarily into a certain dollar amount for the wage, but tie your performance reviews in, make them annually formally, but make quarterly check-ins so that your performance check-ins are tying back the person's performance to their wage, basically. And that way you're not going to get out of parity and have somebody complain and say, well, this guy, he's making top tier, but he can't do X, Y, and Z. If it's in the evaluation, if it's something that you're going to measure, put it in the performance review and tie performance to compensation. Those are,
I mean, one of the things that I always had a lot of pushback on when I was trying to do that with people who work for me when I was running manufacturing plants is keeping up with those performance reviews. And
yeah.
depending on how that's designed, that can just be mind-numbingly time-consuming and very difficult for the average supervisor to cope with. Maybe you could share a little bit of how you've overcome that problem of, you know, how do you get the behavior you're looking for? And then more importantly, what's the process that you've had success with where it actually gets done and it's not so
Wow.
onerous that the poor manager with, 10 direct reports has to spend 25% of their time every day just worrying about future performance reviews, right?
Yeah, the old school performance reviews, you sit down, it takes an hour and you're just
Yep.
you're telling them everything, right? I like to just flip that. Make them these quarterly check-ins are 15 minutes. And
Okay.
if everybody knows what's on their performance review, give them no more than 3 or 4 things that they have to do. That doesn't mean that you don't care about them being late or something else, but pick 4 things, 3 to 5, no more than 3 to 5 that are truly important things to hit. If you can make them metric based, so they're not if there's no subjectivity here. It's a metric, and it's in the annual one that you're going to sit down at the end of the year and do, but it's quarterly. Go sit down with them at lunch. Have a stroll, walk with them from the time card to the whatever, just and talk about those things. They don't have to be sit down formal. And it's those 3 to 5 things, and that's all you're talking about. Just say, how do you think you're doing? Turn it around. Don't you talk as the leader. Let them talk. Let them self-assess. Let them if they're metric based, then you can't have a spin. So that's my run. That's my advice is just keep them simple, make them metric based, and do them frequently enough that they can be while you're walking somewhere having a chat, and they don't have to be sit down for.
Yeah, one of the things in the visual workplace that could really support that, and I'm wondering if you've had success, is, you think about, the gumbo box, and then you've got your stand-up areas, and then you've got each line or, assembly area, and it has a board or some place where we're capturing those metrics. And it's the basis to come together and talk about what are we trying to do for the day? What are the problems we're solving? How are we performing? What do we need to be doing? It sounds like to some extent you're trying to link up that performance appraisal for the individual so that they can self-inform and be prepared to discuss how they're doing with respect to supporting one of those Gemba boards, if you will. Have you had success with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that again, making it a metric that they can identify with. You can do it right there at the Gemma board if you have them by the cell. Not everybody's there, right? That's more down the road. But if you have a metric, a Gemma board for the entire plant, that's a good place to start. And then you can compare what the target is for everybody versus where they're performing. And absolutely, it's just part of the conversation.
Yeah, it harkens back to, the basics of the Toyota production system. When we think about getting down to the workstation, I had the pleasant experience of working with ex-Toyota people doing very detailed granular value stream mapping at Ford assembly plants. And we were breaking down those key metrics: safety, quality, delivery, SQDCMP, right? Safety, quality, delivery, productivity, cost, and morale. Well,
Yep.
that's a mouthful, right? So to your
Yeah.
point, you're not trying to get all of that worked into a performance review at the individual level. You're picking the 3 or 4 key things that they have
Yeah.
influence
That's my
with.
fail. Yep.
And it's tied to their development plan, it's tied to their future pay, and you try to do that smart.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, and it's the SMART acronym, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound or trackable. And you mentioned the SCUDIT boards. It came from Danaher, and those boards were everywhere. And here's something that I will say that I wasn't quite sure I agreed with when I first got there. They didn't want any of their plants using them electronically. They wanted you to have to get up and write in them, and they gave you 2 colored markers. There's a red and it's a yellow, not a good example, and a green.
Right.
And they,
Exactly.
and they would make you go to your board, and at the cellular level, you had to fill your numbers in with a green or a red marker. And no one wanted to pick up the red marker, right? A little pride in there. There's that, and there's one more piece of advice that I'll give. That when somebody's red, doesn't mean they failed. Doesn't mean they're bad.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean they should even feel bad. What it means is just a call to action for smart people to do something differently than they were doing before. As they say, common sense, vigorously apply. It's red. It's okay. And so now the board is the one delivering the message that it's not on target. Now the manager can step in and go, Hey, bud, I see you red there. What can I do to help you? I'm sure we can work on this together. Now you're the good guy and you're working on somebody. You're helping them get to where they want to go. And you say, how do we work together to work on this? And it's a
Exactly.
conversation.
Completely. I really resonate with that. And I think there is significant automation opportunities around the capture and the sharing of the information that is way more efficient. Do you really want people to stop their work and walk 50, 60 feet and spend, 35 seconds writing some stuff down when that could have be visible directly overhead or at the end of the aisle automatically with, PLCs and interfaces of the data so that it's not an onerous added task, but it can happen as part of the process. So I think that's a real business case for looking at how we automate that. I mean, I've seen crazy things where we just think about timekeeping and how onerous that can be. And, there's great automation opportunities there from a timekeeping perspective, but also, it can drive behavior, right? With respect to being conscious of, okay, I'm 45 minutes into my hour. How are we doing against the target for that hour, right? And then, harking back to, good management practices, part of the culture within the Danaher operating system, and I believe is, if we find defects, like if there's a mistake, it's not who do we punish? It's no, with the defect is treated as a treasure. It's like, oh, our system did not support the individual who needed to do the work. As leaders, we didn't put in place the tools, the methods, the support they need to be successful. It's not them, it's us that has to do something.
Yeah, there was another element of that Danaher culture, and that is learn to live in the red. Because if you had too many greens in a row, you got questioned as to why you're not up in your game a little bit, even if it was like a basis point, right? Just you're up in it just a little bit. If you got greens every day, every week, every month, in that system, somebody would see it and go, come on now. You've given yourself a layup. Let's raise the bar just a little bit, even if it's a little bit. And it's okay to be in the red. That's the whole culture. It's okay to be in the red. You're like, it's a treasure. We just got better.
Yep. And you would probably advocate for, I call it kind of the zero basis cost culture of, we're not working against this arbitrary standard. Once we hit it, we're done. We take a breath. We're all done. We don't need to get any better. It's zero base. Like at the beginning of each period, we figure out where we are. We set a reasonable target for improvement.
Yep.
And we're working, to your point, we're working in the red, right? Because we set a target out there that's better than we're performing today. So we are going to be in red for a while, right? But
Yep.
gives us, the mindset of we're never done improving, because I can guarantee we're never done, with customers, having more demands of us. We're never done with getting faster. We're never done with being better. We just have to build that into the culture, because if we fail to do that and our competitors do, what's going to happen to us? Goodbye jobs.
That's right. Yep.
Awesome.
So let's see. Do we hit,
Yeah. What else do you want to cover before we get into wrap up?
yeah, I think, I think we talked about the pricing. We might have talked about the
Right.
solutioning while we were talking through it, but just, have a pricing committee, have some diligence around your cost, know what your cost basis is, keep an eye on it carefully, measure it frequently. Every month you should be looking at your variances. And, I missed a part on estimating. When you're estimating, you need to go back when you win, right? You put a quote out and then you win and then you make the product. Come back, it's called performance to estimate, the PTE. You have to measure that. If you're not measuring, there's two KPIs you got to measure, I think, in estimating is estimating on-time delivery, one, because if your quotes are going out late, you're going to lose more of them. Automatically, your win rates go down. And number two, what's your performance to estimate? So what you put in there, did it actually turn out that way? And if it didn't, that's just one of those things you got to ask yourself, why, what happened, go problem solve, and up your process. And you should be doing that with every job you win. That way you're continuously improving your estimating process, and your when you estimate it and you win it, your P&L is going to be impacted like you think it will, and not like you think it will.
Yeah, I think the best benchmarking organizations can consider is the automotive tier one suppliers, bigger ones in particular.
Yeah,
They've got a pretty good scientific approach for doing that. What you just described is, trying to do a really good job of estimating on the front end and anticipating what can and will go wrong and building in protection for that. But then having a very formal go back and validate, yes, in fact, that product is being delivered on time, is delivering the margin it's expected at the quality level required, and then using that as the basis to drive continuous improvement of the estimating process. So yeah, when you had the miss, what did we learn? that we can incorporate into future state. The tier one auto suppliers, the larger ones, if you want to benchmark, it's a good place to go look.
Yeah, it is. Those are very rigid customers. Uh, I haven't. I've served into the business, but I didn't work for a tier one supplier. I was a tier two, and they are extremely rigid in their practices. So if you're a listener and you're in that, you already know what that is, and everything I'm saying to you, you're probably shaking your head. So great point.
All right. Awesome. Any other advice for us?
Yeah, I mean, we could do this, you and I, and have similar. We're cut from the same cloth, so I think we could probably do this for hours if someone let us. I think that's good for now. I just hope that this was helpful for people, and obviously, if you have any other follow ups to this, and you get some listener feedback, and you want to hop on again to hit some topics we didn't have time for, love to do it.
All right. Well, Steve, this has been great. Let's suggest that, somebody in the audience, you said something that caught their eye, their ear. They wanted to hear more about that. They wanted to ask you about how they might solve a particular problem. How do people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, Steve Snedegar. Believe it or not, there is another Steve Snedegar that's not related to me, at least not by a family tree that I know, on LinkedIn. He's a CPA somewhere like West Virginia, I think. But I'm obviously not that one. I'm the Snedegar in manufacturing. So if you Google that, you'll find me. You can also go to my business website, which is Stage 5, the number 5 Partners, and we help all kinds of businesses. We've been doing turnaround work, and as you said, private equity. Anytime you find companies break all the time, even well-run companies, like I worked for Otis Elevator and Tyco and Danaher, there were always, because there's humans and we're not perfect, things happen and you run into problems. You get busy, things break. You get slow, things break. You make an acquisition, things break. You change your product mix a little bit, things break. And we've been helping companies that find things that break in their production systems or even in their commercial systems, and just help them identify it. Sometimes you just need somebody to step back and look in and go, did you think about this? Did you see that? And sometimes people are too close to what they're in and they don't see what's in front of them. But we've been helping companies do that for decades.
Awesome. Steve, this has been great. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Ron. Good as always to see you.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Yep.
Thank you for joining Metapod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.